It's been a decade of disruption. As we head into a new decade, let's take a look at the FinTech trends of the 2010s and the evolution of financial planning technology. Joining me to talk FinTech, technology, and the evolution of advisory practices is Tony Stich, COO of Advicent. Tony, great to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first and foremost, there's been so much innovation over the past decade. So can you tell us about the FinTech trends of the 2010s?
Yeah, so when we talk about the decade of disruption, we're talking about, think about it, the last 10 years, right? This is the end of 2019, and that will encapsulate these last 10 years. And there's two major trends that we've kind of watched over the last decade, which has really kind of shaped how we're providing advice. The first one is the advent of the robo-advisor. So the first robos came out in around the year 2010, and that truly changed the way consumers expected to receive advice, okay? Now, we could debate the topic of how fast they grew and if they really made an impact, but we can all agree that digitally speaking, we have to improve how we deliver advice because they're expecting more as our clients and prospects. And the second part of that decade was really around the regulation aspect of it, right? Especially the DOL fiduciary standards, but also most recently Reg BI. Those two regulations truly also changed the way we provide advice. Now, the fiduciary standards never made it, let's say, to the main market, if you will, but they did a few things. The fiduciary standards shed a light on our industry. It made people kind of look more at how advice is delivered, both our clients and prospects, but also the government. So again, another way that we've had to change the way we provide advice, and that's why we're calling this the decade of disruption. Those two elements really transformed how we provide advice now and going forward.
And Tony, I think you bring up a lot of important points, in particular robo-advisors as well as regulation. And as we move forward into the next decade, we're sure to see continued innovation as well as disruption. So given that there's also the wealth transfer happening and the fact that there's a younger generation, what do you expect to see going forward?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's something we're watching unfold as we speak, right? So the generational wealth transfer is occurring, and it'll continue to occur over the maybe next 20 years or so. We see the robo-advisors kind of changing the way they're providing advice. You're seeing much more on the hybrid space, the central planning models, and you're seeing this new generation of individuals that want to receive advice, right? In fact, it's been fascinating. We've seen that the younger and younger individual investors are, the more they want to see advice because the accessibility of it, digitally speaking. So over the next 10 years, it's hard to look into the future, but when you think about the next 10 years, I think about advisors having to augment their practice, right? They need to think more digitally first because there's a term we coined, or at least we use quite frequently, it's called pajama planning. The idea is that people want to receive advice on their time when they're ready for it. And a lot of times people stay up at night because of finances. They lose sleep for that. And so there's this theory about pajama planning where they go online and they research topics online. And if you're not there as an advisor or firm providing advice or digital tools online, where are they going? What are they looking at? Are they looking at your competition? Are they looking at a robo-advisor or someone else? So the idea is it's not just the millennials and not just Gen Z, it's actually all wealth spectrum people that want to receive advice digitally because they want to receive it on their time, even if it's in their pajamas.
Well, that's very interesting that you mentioned that term. Indeed, we have access to information that we didn't a decade ago, and the convenience of having access to this information has also made a lot of differences in terms of behavior.
Yes.
So naturally, when it comes to financial planning technology, we've seen an evolution. What do you expect to see going forward?
Yeah, no, that's actually a fantastic question, and I'll tell you why, because when you look at 10 years ago, advice delivery was still somewhat episodic, and it wasn't relevant after a certain period of time, okay? And nowadays, 10 years later, with really account aggregation taking shape, but also not just account aggregation, just the idea that data is more accessible through deep integrations, but also through meaningful integrations, we're seeing more real-time relevance. The idea that a plan is truly living because it's daily relevant. It's being updated in real time. So when someone wants to access their plan 10 years ago or 20 years ago, it was finding a PDF report in a doc vault or maybe a print up if it was that long ago. And now it's much more dynamic in living. And you'll see that actually because a plan manifests itself nowadays online in different areas, right? So before, when you think about a financial plan 10 years ago, you think one large kind of monolithic document, right? That kind of encapsulated your financial life. Nowadays, with this decade of disruption and really this third wave of planning, we're seeing plans manifest themselves differently, in just little bite-sized nuggets, which helps the consumer and sometimes the prospect understand and embrace financial planning to be more proactive and think about the interactivity between the advisor and the client and how that's changing.
And Tony, this has ramifications as well as implications for the advisor. So what does this mean for advisory practices?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because at the end of the day, the advisor should be at the core of the relationship, right? Advisors provide the gamma, they provide the empathy, they provide true advice for their constituents, for their clients. And so when you talk about this decade of disruption, you talk about the third wave of planning, all the technology available to advisors, it can be very overwhelming, right? It can be very much like, oh my goodness, like I can't keep up. I think advisors need to think about a few things. They need to stay relevant with technology. They have to. They have to be able to provide advice online when a client or prospect wants it. If that's at night with a portal, or of course, technologically speaking, other ways. And secondly, they need to provide good comprehensive advice. We're seeing with this race to zero, right, and robo-advisors, we're seeing kind of a commoditization of advice and investment management. So what we need to do as advisors is provide comprehensive plans that are truly holistic and unique to their clients and prospects, because that demonstrates that gamma. That separates themselves from a robot or a large firm. So that's what advisors need to do. They need to think about how they can separate themselves through technology, providing good comprehensive advice.
And at the end of the day, Tony, when it comes down to advice, it's all about the human touch. And no matter how much technology advances, we're always going to need that human touch and that advisor. So what's your advice for financial professionals out there?
Like you said, at the end of the day, there's always the desire for human touch, right? And there's study after study suggests that too. People want to do it themselves. They want to interact with their plan, they want to play with it online, but when it comes to key decisions, especially that have financial impacts that can be lifelong, they want to talk to an advisor. So what we recommend at NaviPlan to all advisors is to understand your niche, understand who you serve well, and kind of focus on that, right? So promoting yourself as someone who specializes in X, Y, or Z, right? But then you need to look for the right technology to help augment your practice, right? Don't look for technology that you change for the technology. Look for technology that'll change for you. Because if you can do those two things well, provide specific advice to a nice audience, coupled with nice, elegant technology, you'll be an advisor for life, and you can fend off all the different, robo-advisors and larger firms. You can fight those battles because you have the tools in your toolkit to provide good advice to your constituents.
Well, Tony, I think those are very important distinctions. So thank you so much for insights today, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. I was joined by Tony Stich, COO of Advicent. From our studios in New York City, I'm Remy Blaire for Asset TV.